The reality is, if as Christians we can casually or emphatically say or imply that, well, of course Harris would have been better, or of course they're equal evils, we are so far from being helpful in leading the nation in righteousness and justice. We're so far from being helpful for the unborn babies who cannot speak for themselves. And for all our pro-lifeness, whatever we say we believe, whatever, if we end up playing for the wrong side, what good is it? Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of About Abortion in a very historic week. We're putting this out hopefully on Friday, the Friday just after Donald Trump was elected for his second term as president. I'm joined by our USA political correspondent, Debbie Mountford.
Hi, nice to be back.
Debbie, it's great to have you. Thanks for calling in. You're not actually in the US at the moment. You're further west than I am, but no, same time zone. And Debbie, tell me, what was your instinctive reaction when you saw that Trump had won? Give us 3 words. What was it in 3 words? 3 words to describe your reaction when you heard the news.
Delighted, hopeful, excited, I think were my 3 words. I sent a message to a friend because, as you know, Dave, I have been following this race probably a little bit too enthusiastically for the last few months. And I've had my electoral map up for the last couple of months and changing states and following odds. But I did send my final prediction, which was very optimistic, to a friend of mine who is also interested in the election, kind of on election day before any of the exit polls came in, kind of about lunchtime in the US time. And I was 1 state out. So I'm going to claim my political punditry on that. So I did predict he would take all the swing states. I thought he would flip New Hampshire, and I was wrong. He didn't get New Hampshire, but I don't think that's too bad. So yeah, there you
Debbie,
go. But
very you're an even better US political correspondent than I thought you were. Certainly a lot better than Rory Stewart. Not that that's difficult, but that's quite a prediction. I think you're more in touch with the real people than a lot of the pollsters.
Well, I think it just depends what you're looking at. And the pollsters, I was convinced the pollsters had not corrected for several things that would be swaying in Donald Trump's favor. They were claiming they'd learned their lessons from 2016 and 2020. And there were just some signs there that were indicating that they hadn't. One of the Democratic leaning pollsters, but very highly regarded, came out the day before the election saying that Kamala Harris was going to win Iowa, when the county by county data in Iowa showed that they had registered more Republicans in every county than Democrats. So it was just daft. And Trump ended up taking Iowa by 13 points, as we expected he would. So there was all sorts of shenanigans in the run-up. But yeah, 1 state out, not too bad. I'm going to claim that.
Pretty good. Yeah, my 3 words would be pretty similar. We will come on to the caveats later on, and that's important to fill in the picture a bit more. But I think it's right to start with a note of rejoicing, really, and yes, certainly gratitude. Put quite simply, if we had woken up to Kamala Harris being president of the United States, it would have been just many, many times worse. And so I was just so relieved and grateful. And actually, I was surprised because, certainly talking with you the other day, I didn't expect to see the result actually come through so quickly. I thought there was going to be a delay. The Babylon Bee said, Democrats warn the election can't be announced until 110% of the votes been counted. So I thought,
yes.
so that at one level I was surprised at how quickly it came through, but I was also pleasantly surprised to see that in the Lord's mercy we have been spared. The US has been spared, but in a sense, the world, what Harris would have been.
Yes, and the GOP certainly learned from 2020. They had 3,500 lawyers on the ground across the country, and they had actually fought several lawsuits with regards to equal representation in poll watchers between Republicans and Democrats, and ensuring that the vote count was going to be fair and accurate. But the Babylon Bee, not too far off with the 110%, because 6 of the 7 swing states in 2020 reported more than 100% of voters, more than 100% of voter registrations actually voted. So there was 107%, 109, 110, 105. So, and given that you're never going to get 100% of your registered voters actually voting, having the ultimate toll be that far above 100% was interesting. So that's not happened this time, and I think the operation on the ground was much quicker. It still took them quite a long time to call Arizona and Nevada, but once Pennsylvania was called, that was it. There was no way. She had no path without Pennsylvania, so it was a very good morning. I did hear the call live, so I went to bed about 1 a.m. because I was working the following day. But I think they made the call at about 20 past 6 in the morning, 25 past 6 in the morning, and I was up by that point, so got to hear it. So that was good.
Fantastic. Well, yeah. So I think we're of a similar mind here. We're rejoicing. We're thankful. Um, we will come on to some of the caveats, but before that, let's continue, if you're happy, Debbie, in the vein of what's good here. What does this mean? What does this outcome mean, particularly, of course, for the unborn? We did talk, a few weeks ago, didn't we, about where Trump was at as an individual.
Yeah.
But just, yeah, sketch out for us what does this likely mean for the prospects of the unborn in the States for the next few years, and also perhaps you could help us understand a bit more of the political system as well, because of course you've got the Senate, you've got um, other results coming through,
Yeah.
not just the president. And so,
Yeah.
can you sketch out for us? Yeah, what does this likely mean?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, this election was not just about the presidency. So Americans have many more boxes to tick when they enter a polling booth than we do. We simply vote for an MP, and that's it. And local council elections are separate. So the Americans were voting; they were choosing their president. They were also choosing their Senate representatives, their representatives for Congress, and then they were choosing state representatives as well. And there were also several state-specific issues on the ballot, and abortion was on the ballot in 10 states separately. So I suppose start with the national picture first. So the Republicans have not just won the presidency, they've also taken the Senate, which at the moment is Democrat, and it's likely that they will retain the House. They might lose a couple of seats margin in the House, but they will retain the House. So that means that you've got a Republican executive branch, a Republican legislative branch in both houses, and of course the Supreme Court at the moment leans conservative. So that's a Republican judicial branch as well. So for the next 2 years at least, the Republican Party will control all three branches of government. Now, the word control, when you're talking about the judicial branch, is always a controversial one, because obviously the judicial system is meant to be impartial, but we all know that the judges have their biases, and that comes through. So from a pro-life perspective, obviously we know that Trump has toned down his rhetoric. He was much more pro-life in 2016. But he still is, he would say he's pro-life, he's for the exceptions, but he believes it's a states issue. J.D. Vance, his vice president, is very pro-life. And in fact, he did a podcast with Joe Rogan just before the election, and they did speak about abortion for a good chunk of that. So I would encourage people to listen to it. I think they start talking about abortion about 2 hours and 15 minutes in. But you do have people now in positions of power who are pro-life and who are around Trump who are pro-life, who are going to be able to put the case to the American people. But what it's not going to mean is what the other side were arguing all along. Trump is, unfortunately for us, but Trump is not going to sign a national abortion ban. In fact, women's rights in America are probably not going to change very much at all when Trump takes office from what they are now, because Trump has said it's a states issue and the states are voting individually. He's not going to change that. The irony is that had Kamala Harris won, she wouldn't have been able to change it either. She was running on this platform of restoring the protections of Roe v. Wade. But what she wasn't saying to the people was how she was going to accomplish that. She's the sitting vice president. Biden is the sitting president. Roe was overturned 2 years ago. They haven't done anything to change it because they can't, because it's not within their power, because it's a states issue. So that's the irony, is that even had Kamala Harris won, nothing would be particularly different. I think the only things that would be different if Kamala Harris had won is that the states that have passed pro-life laws would continue to be hampered in the way that they have been for the last 2 years. With Trump now in the presidency and a Republican Senate and House, those pro-life states are far more likely to be able to execute the pro-life legislation that they've passed, which is good news. I suspect that the Democratic states that are currently posting pills into those Republican states by the truckload, it would seem, I imagine that will be stopped, and that there will be a distinction made with regards to state sovereignty sovereignty, and that's a good idea. And then also there's been quite a lot made of the 10 pro-abortion ballots that were put into this election as well. I don't know if you want me to cover those off too, or
If
you
we
want me
come to
to
that in just a few moments, yeah, finish
Okay.
off on your, yeah.
Finish off on the national picture. So, yeah, I mean, again, the national picture is great, and also just coming back to the judicial element as well. The president gets to nominate the justices for the Supreme Court. Now we have two very conservative justices. In fact, probably the two most conservative justices on the Supreme Court at the moment are Samuel Alito and Justice Clarence Thomas. They are both looking to retire. I think Alito is, I'm fairly sure I've got this written down actually. Yeah, Alito's 74 and Thomas is 76. So they will very likely retire during a Trump presidency, which means that two conservative justices, which would be aging out, will be replaced with, we would imagine, much younger conservative justices nominated by Trump. And again, because the justices are confirmed by the Senate and Republicans now control the Senate, he doesn't have to pick compromise candidates. He can essentially nominate who he wants to the Supreme Court, which is again likely to secure a conservative majority in the Supreme Court for a long time to come. And as abortion laws are challenged and moved up to the Supreme Court, that's where those decisions will really have an effect on the pro-life cause.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you, Debbie. Yeah, you can see where those justices are coming from. You get into your late 70s and you probably think I'm almost old enough to start running for president. So no wonder
No
wonder
comment.
they're thinking that. That's helpful. So partly because of Trump's toning down, which we lament, his
Yeah.
pro-life sort of commitments, but also because of the checks and balances that the states have, as opposed to, well, we have it in different ways, but because of those checks and balances, actually Harris being president may not have been all that different. And yet it's probably important, I think, for various reasons, to point out just how pro-abortion she is as an individual. We did a bit of that in our last podcast, but I don't know, Debbie, whether you can comment a bit on that, making allowances for the fact that she may not have been able to actually achieve very much in any time soon. But when she was is it director of public prosecutions, is that the right term, in California, what she did in the Delayden case with Planned Parenthood and so on, her history isn't
Yeah.
good.
No, she was Attorney General of California. So she was appointed Attorney General of California, I think, in 2011. But yes, she prosecuted David Daleiden. I can never pronounce his surname properly.
I think that's right.
David Daleiden, I think so. So this is someone who went undercover in Planned Parenthood, obviously the biggest abortion provider in the US. He went undercover because they suspected that Planned Parenthood was engaging in illegal activity, selling baby parts to research institutions, which is illegal. You cannot deal in human tissue. So he went undercover and exposed that this indeed was happening. And that it's gruesome. I mean, Live Action in America has done quite a lot on this. If people want to go and research it, you can find a lot of videos on Live Action. You can see the undercover videos as well. But yeah, actually requesting particular parts, aborting babies, pretty big babies in specific ways to preserve certain body parts to then sell for profit. So he exposed this, and it was obviously quite scandalous at the time, because even people who are pro-choice have a line, and a lot of people's lines is selling baby parts of viable or nearly viable babies. But rather than prosecute Planned Parenthood for violating the law and selling human tissue, Kamala Harris decided to prosecute David Daleiden instead, and she went after him extremely aggressively. But she has been pro-abortion through her career, through her Senate career, when she ascended to the Senate in, was it 2015 or 2017? I think she got to the Senate. She has always said she believes that the government should not be involved at all, and it should be entirely the woman's decision. So very, very much by implication, that means through all 9 months of pregnancy. She supported Amendment 4 in Florida, which was on the ballot this time, which would have legalized abortion up to birth. She has consistently refused, even when she was trying to tone down the late-term abortion rhetoric in the presidential campaign. She's consistently refused to say, or always dodging the question about whether or not there should be restrictions on late-term abortion. the week before the election, she was on an interview with, I think, NBC, where she explicitly said that no, there would not be any exceptions for Christian doctors and religious hospitals, Catholic hospitals, much as there wasn't with the nuns that were forced to provide contraception. That there should not be any exceptions when it comes to what a woman can and can't do with her own body. So, very, very pro-abortion. And, again, I do find it, very sad that a lot of Christians just either don't know that, or that it doesn't seem to resonate more, that there was someone who was running on such a pro-abortion platform. But I mean, again, and she was also just outright lying. I mean, the number of times she went on stage in her rallies saying that Trump would sign a national abortion ban, something that he has gone on record time and again saying that he wouldn't do. The number of times that she's talked about how women will be dying from miscarriages and ectopic pregnancies, just outright lies, not called out by the media at all, which some of which we covered in our last podcast together. So yeah, very, very pro-abortion.
Yeah, thank you for painting some of that picture, and we'll come back to that if you don't mind a bit later on, because I think it does matter a lot in terms of, as you say, how Christians have responded. It does seem briefly that many Christians on both sides of the Atlantic are very quick to condemn Trump's character and so on, and they sometimes have a point. That Harris gets a free pass. She can lie publicly again and again. And it's difficult to overstate really the depravity it takes to prosecute someone who's exposed this heinous. I mean, it's just grim what they're doing to these babies, torturing babies to death for profit. Not just killing them, but torturing them and selling their body parts for profit. And she went after the guy who exposed them. You can't get much more evil than that. I'm sorry, you can't. It doesn't matter if you happen to be a woman and a person of color and could be the first black female president. That doesn't change the fact that that's an utterly depraved individual, and we should be horrified that someone like that should serve in any public office, let alone such a senior one. But we'll come back to that a bit later. Tell us, Debbie, about the referenda. What's gone on, and in particular, what good news has there been through these referenda?
Yeah, so there were 10 states that had pro-abortion ballots as part of this election. And if you Google it, you will see pages and pages of headlines of victories for reproductive rights, victories for abortion rights, as 7 out of 10 states advance reproductive justice. That's I googled it earlier. That's all you're getting. But when you drill down into it, as is usually the case, it paints quite a different picture. So, of the 10 states that had pro-abortion measures on the ballot, 5 of them were deep blue democratic states where abortion is already very freely available and legal, and nothing has changed since the overturning of Roe v. Wade. There have been no pro-life laws passed. All that's happened is that those rights have now been enshrined in state constitutions, but in practice they've not changed anything. And indeed, in one of them in New York, it didn't even mention abortion. It was actually about discrimination based on pregnancy outcomes, and it was a very vague piece of legislation. So I'm not quite sure why that was even included in the 10. So it was only actually 5 over the 10 where they had pro-abortion ballots to be voted on, where the overturn of Roe had actually had some effect. So these states had passed pro-life laws to varying degrees. And of those 5, the ballots were rejected in 3 of them. So the pro-life states actually won in 3 out of 5. So I see that as a victory. Obviously, it's terrible what's happened in Arizona and Missouri, and I'll cover that in a second. But Florida, the Amendment 4 to the Floridian Constitution, which was on the ballot and which was brought up in the presidential debate, would have legalized abortion up to birth. And Florida has a 6-week abortion ban in place. Now, the Florida Constitution is slightly different in that constitutional amendments require 60% of the vote to pass, not 50%. So they did have a slight advantage there, but they didn't get that 60%, and that was defeated. So the 6-week ban stays in place in Florida. The other ones were South Dakota and Nebraska. And Nebraska, actually, there was 2 measures on the ballot in Nebraska. One was to to overturn their abortion restrictions and codify it kind of into law up to birth, which was rejected. And the other one was to ratify the abortion ban that they currently have, which is anything after 12 weeks, and that passed. So that was a kind of a double whammy in Nebraska, and South Dakota has rejected abortion as well. So very, very grateful for that. The two states where the pro-abortion legislation did pass. Arizona had a 15-week ban in place since the overturning of Roe. Sadly, that's now been extended up to viability up to 24 weeks. But given the vast majority of abortions take place before 15 weeks, in reality, the number of babies that will affect will be lower than Missouri, which sadly has overturned a near outright ban. So Missouri is a red state, it's a Republican state. It's one of the states where a near outright ban with exceptions for life of the mother, etc., was in place, and they now have abortion up to viability up to 24 weeks. But still, not the picture that was painted or that's being painted across the newspapers in the last couple of days. It's not a 7 out of 10 victory. It's a 2 out of 5, which is actually a victory for the pro-life side. And I would just say as well, I was so encouraged by some of the exit polls in terms of who voted for Trump, even given the rhetoric on the other side, even given the relentless adverts and some of the ads that were playing on American TV with regards to what Trump would supposedly do with reproductive rights and how he would harm women were truly horrific. And even being constantly bombarded with that, Trump took, in fact, I've got the NBC exit polls up next to me. According to the exit polls, 45% of women still voted for Trump. So 45% of American women voted for Trump. And when you break it down by race, he took white women. 53% of white women voted for Trump.
Wow.
And America is obviously 60% white, it's majority white. 53% of white women voted for Trump. So the idea that this was going to be a revolution and the women of America were going to backlash for reproductive justice, it didn't happen. There are clearly women, a lot of pro-life women in America, and also a lot of women who would maybe be pro-choice, but were willing to live with Trump's, it's a states' rights issue, because they were far more concerned about things like the economy and, not starting World War III, etc. But I was still so encouraged. I do not think that the demographics that broke down for Trump were expected. He won Hispanic men. There hasn't been a Republican that's won the Hispanic vote, I think, since, for a very, very long time. In fact, there was one county. There's one county next to the Rio Grande, which is 95% Hispanic. It's called Starr County. And that hasn't gone for a Republican since 1892. And Trump won that county. In fact, the difference between his 2016 run and his 2024 run, he flipped that county by 76 points. That's how drastic this was. Clinton in 2016 won women by 13 points. Biden won women by 15 points. Harris still won the female vote overall, but only by 10 points. She dropped 5 points on the female vote since Biden. So, the tactics of the other side didn't work. And I think along with the encouragements that we can see, even aside from the losses in what's happened in the States, I'm just really encouraged by the demographics as well.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Debbie. I was, when you're talking about these different states and particular Arizona, it reminded me of both the encouragements and the challenges that we can see here. So that the fact that we've got these referenda, and many of them deciding in favour of the unborn child, really to me shows a great deal of depth in real pro-life work over many years, actually persuading people. That's hearts and minds changed. That's a popular vote. That's amazing.
Yeah.
But what we can also see is where that work hasn't gone as deep or perhaps as quickly as was needed to actually maintain those pro-life victories. So when things got better, but then they relapse, well, it's kind of obvious what's happened there is the laws actually sort of went ahead of public opinion. And for me, it underscores just that the importance of the ongoing deep work of changing hearts and minds, in particular, showing the humanity of the baby and really being emphatic about that, and exposing the horrors of the inhumanity of what we call abortion, which really is a euphemism. We can never, well, until it's really done, we can't rest on our laurels. We've got
Yeah.
to make it unthinkable, and that's the ongoing task before the pro-life movement in the States.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Um, I'd like to move on, if I may, now, Debbie, to
Yeah.
the question of how Christians in particular have been responding to
Mm.
this. Um,
Oh,
I
we got some feedback there.
I've just axed it. Someone's trying to call me. Probably
Oh.
spam. No real people ever try and call me. So, um, I've been looking a bit at reactions, and in a
Mm.
sense they're not surprising. It's just part and parcel of what we see all the time. But a
Yeah.
lot of things come to the surface with more clarity, don't they, at these moments? And I've been looking at the responses of Christians, particularly pastors in the States, and then also here in the UK. And I think it's really important that we make proper distinction between those two contexts, because they are different and the
Yeah.
challenges are different. So I don't know what you make of this, Debbie, but I want to just sketch out the three big errors that I see in the States and get your reaction to them, see if you think I'm right. And then we'll look at the UK,
Yeah.
which I think is actually a more monolithic scene, really, when it comes to this. So I
Much.
think there are three. I think there are three key errors that amongst professing Christians in the States. So error number one is the claim that Harris would have been better,
Yeah.
and we saw that. For example, there's a quite famous. I don't know if it's a tweet or a I don't know what the format was originally, but I saw it on Twitter with one of the Ortlands saying, "Never Trump, this time Harris, always Jesus." I don't know if you saw that one. I think actually, I don't know if you saw that. I think that came out maybe the day after we recorded our last podcast on this. But the sort of David French, the Russell Moore kind of crowd in the States, some of them from the Gospel Coalition, or some of the Gospel Coalition anyway, with this sort of, well, of course, we only put our hope in Jesus, and there's freedom to vote Republican or Democrat. Oh, and by the way, we're going to vote Democrat. So basically the claim that Harris would have been better. I think that's the first error we see.
Yeah.
I think it hardly. I don't think it should need really much justification as to why. I think that's an error. I just think if you have eyes and a
Yeah.
conscience, it
Yeah.
should be pretty obvious that Harris would have been a lot worse. And we don't think Trump is perfect, and I'll come on to that. Lots of faults, both as a person and also in his
Yeah.
some of his policy ambitions. But if you think Harris is better, you're just not looking, or you're in denial. So that to me is the first great error. And
Mm.
sometimes it's that error is sort of it's cloaked. It's like a dagger, but with a cloak over it, the cloak of, but of course we all trust in Jesus. We're not really putting our trust in any politician. Well, of course, yeah, we trust in Jesus, but that doesn't give us cover to then go on and make morally reprehensible judgments like, well, Harris is just as good or even better. So
Yeah.
that's the first error. Don't know if
Yeah.
have you seen that one?
Oh, yes. No, I didn't see the particular tweet you mentioned, but yes, copious amounts of this,
Mm,
and I do find it very difficult because, like you, I don't understand how any Christian could look at either policies or track record and come to that conclusion. I do find it quite mind-boggling.
yeah.
Um,
So that's the first error I see. The second error I see is it's either said out loud or just kind of implied. Well, they're both as bad as each other, you know.
yeah,
So again, cloaked in this, we trust in Jesus, put not your trust in princes. And they're both bad, so it doesn't really matter. Maybe even abstain from voting,
yeah,
and just trust Jesus. Now, John Piper, whom I massively respect and value and learn from constantly, as a preacher, as a teacher, he at the last election he didn't quite say out loud, but basically did, that he thought the right thing to do was to abstain because he thought that they were both sort of bad, basically.
Mm.
Um, and then this time, I didn't see what he said, if anything, before the election, but after the election result came out, he basically said, God has. Maybe I'll see if I can find the exact quote, but it was along the lines of, God has saved us from one evil, now we're being tested with the other evil. And basically suggested the evils are equal. They're equivalent evils. He didn't
Yeah.
in this message, and I don't think he said anywhere, he didn't give any indication of we've been saved from a greater evil, but there's still a
Yeah.
lesser evil, which I think is a valid point to make. Indeed, probably I would, in a sense, agree with to some
Yeah.
extent. But he just suggested, they're both as evil. There's no
Yeah.
distinction. And again, to me, that is just such a clear error because, again, if you think they're equal, you're just not listening.
Yeah.
One of them prosecuted someone for exposing the torture of babies
Mm-hmm.
for profit. I
Yep.
can't. You would, if you made stuff up like that, people wouldn't believe you. And yet it's happening right before our eyes. And some Christians are saying we should vote for that woman, or we should think it's morally okay to vote for that woman as against the alternative. And again, it baffles me that great men of God with a wonderful history of
Mm-hmm.
ministry have got to such a point of, frankly, um, moral bankruptcy. I'm sorry,
Yep.
but to be able to make a judgment like that, that's amoral Christianity. That's like, yeah, the gospel isn't just morality, there's grace, but it's not less than morality. It's not amoral. Moral
Yep.
implications do exist, and part of spiritual maturity, in fact, the writer of Hebrews pretty much defines spiritual maturity as this, is learning to distinguish good from evil. That's
Yeah.
the solid food, is to actually know the difference by constant training, by practice, the difference between good and evil. And I'm sorry, but if you look at Harris and think she's better as a prospect or even equal, that to me does not show good judgment about making distinctions between good and evil. So I think that's the second error. Anything from you on that, Debbie? Have you seen that one?
Yeah, I've got lots. I'm even taking notes, Dave. You'll be sorry you asked me these questions in a minute because I have a lot to say. But
All
yes,
right.
I have definitely heard that, and yeah, I come to the exact same conclusion as you. We're usually of one mind, and today is no different.
We haven't collaborated. I promise everyone.
No, we
We
haven't. No,
we uh, we could hardly even get the call to function. So
true.
right, error number three is and this, in a sense, this is the one we need to perhaps uh, look at most carefully.
Mm.
And I'm interested to hear what you think about the degree to which this is a real error, or it's just one that is to some extent invented by opponents, particularly in the media, or the kind of the real life straw man, I call it. So it's a straw man in that it does misrepresent what most Trump supporters are, but it's real life in that there are some people who are like this, and they serve as a very helpful pin-up for demonizing all Trump supporters, even those who are more nuanced, with the caveats, with whatever. But it seems that there are at least some, and you'll probably know better than I, Debbie, how prevalent these people might be. But it
Mm.
does appear that error number three, there are some who support Trump, but go way overboard, and they do somewhat idolize him. They do think he is almost a messiah figure.
Mm-hmm.
They overlook his blemishes, they overstate his powers, and sometimes they go to the point of blasphemy, basically, in really the language they use of him. So they sort of deify him. Um,
Yeah.
I'm prepared to say that error is out there. Some people are doing that, but I would quickly say I can't think off the top of my head of any well-known Christian leader, for example, any well-known pastor, any theologian, any statesman with any kind of platform. I can't think of any who are speaking in those terms. Um,
No.
Rather, I think what you see is um, someone with a camera will find someone at a Trump rally wearing a T-shirt that says something like this, and then try and construe, well, that's what all evangelical Trump supporters are like. They think he's the Messiah. So I don't think we can say no one's thinking that. I think it's probably exaggerated how many people are thinking that.
Yes.
But certainly that view,
Yeah.
insofar as it does exist, is an error. Of course, we don't put our trust in princes, even ones who are more squeaky clean than Trump. We still don't want to equate them with, the only hope of the nation or whatever. But
Yeah.
certainly in the case of Trump, both personally and his most recent pro-life pronouncements, we would be foolish to, put too much hope in him for sure. Much as you and I and others would massively give thanks that we've got him instead of Harris.
Yes.
So those are three errors. I don't know if you want to just give us a 2 or 3 minutes on those, Debbie, and then I want to look at the UK.
Oh, 2 or 3 minutes each, or 2 or 3 minutes total? You're testing me here, Dave.
Oh, okay, 4 to 5 minutes in total. How about that?
Right, set a timer. Here we go. Yeah. So the first one, that Harris would have been better than Trump. I do struggle with this, partly because this is one of the first elections, or certainly the first election in our lifetime, where you have had a term of each, and you can see what one did and then what the other one did. So taking the rhetoric out of it, and even taking the personal characters for a second out of it, in terms of both policy and action, what's happened over the last 8 years. And I do not see how anyone can look at those two terms and say that objectively, even with COVID, even with January 6th, even with things that, yes, definitely went wrong, I don't see how you can look at those two terms and declare the Biden-Harris term the more successful one. It's funny when I have this conversation with people, it's all about not liking Trump, and the reasons for not liking Trump are almost universally about what he says and his character, unless it's about abortion and he's going to ban abortion, which isn't true. But then you ask people why they want to vote for Harris. Why do they think Harris would have been better? And again, it's all about, well, she just presents a positive image. She's a woman of color. She's a fresh face. She's looking for kindness, joy. The campaign ran on joy. Even in some of the videos in the US, where they were, some conservative podcasters were at Kamala Harris rallies outside, not necessarily identifying themselves as conservatives, asking, well, what's her favorite, your favorite achievement of hers? What is it that she's done that makes you think she's going to be a great president? Crickets every
Yeah.
time. Because what has she achieved? What were her objectives during her tenure as vice president? She was given 42 million, 42, was it 42 million or 42 billion? Might have been billion, actually. I'd need to check that. 42 with a million or a billion after it, to connect Americans that didn't have internet connection, low-income areas, rural areas, etc., to try and make sure everyone had those advantages. Not one home was connected to the internet with that money, not one. She was also tasked, and again, the media like to do U-turns on this, with being the border czar. And as soon as she started running for president, that was reversed out. Oh, she was never the border czar. She was put in charge of understanding the root causes of immigration. Both Biden himself called her the border czar. There is actually, the word border czar actually appears on a congressional document with regards to Biden nominating for her for that. The word border czar, in inverted commas, is actually in the document. And every single liberal news outlet, from MSNBC to CNN to PBS, called her the border czar at the time. So what happened to the border? The estimates are that they have allowed in somewhere between 22 and 25 illegal immigrants. The graphs on this are unbelievable. From the end of Trump's term, it is the highest level of illegal immigration anywhere in the world in history into a single country. That's how vast this has been. But it's not just, and this isn't that we think immigration is wrong, or that, America is a nation of immigrants. America welcomes immigrants, but legally. And there is a reason for the legal process. It's to ensure that those that are coming into the country are not criminals or terrorists, or those that are going to harm your citizens, and that they can be properly counted so that services can be properly apportioned, and that they're going to contribute to the American economy. Neither you or I would expect to get into America or Australia or anywhere else without going through the proper channels. But the American border at the south is wide open, and the human trafficking issues are unbelievable. A report came out a few weeks ago to say that they have lost track of 325,000 children. 325,000 children that have come across the border, and they now do not know where they are. Now, that overlaps slightly with the end of Trump's term, but by far the majority of those are under Biden-Harris. We know from undercover investigations at the border and straight out investigations that there are huge child trafficking problems. Trump was vilified in his first term for putting kids in cages at the border and family separation. Those cages, incidentally, were built by Obama for that reason. But the reason children were separated from the adults that they were traveling with at the border under the Trump administration was because time after time, he actually employed DNA testing on those children. And time after time, it was discovered that about 70% of them were in no way related to the adults that were bringing them across the border claiming to be their parents. They were being trafficked. Now, the border is now wide open. None of these children are being checked anymore to see whether or not the adults that are claiming to be looking after them are actually looking after them or related to them. They're brought in, they are let go into the United States under a program called Catch and Release, which means they're given a notice to appear at some point in the next 7 years. They might get a visa and in the get citizenship in the meantime, or their asylum case might be heard in 7 years, and in the meantime they're free to go and live in the US and work and claim benefits, etc. 325,000 children. So the policies that she's run on are damaging the American people. There are 13,000 convicted murderers, and this is the ones that they have actually met at the border, discovered that they have a conviction, and let go anyway. This does not count the ones that they didn't check or the ones that they've come across called gotaways and that they're not counting. This is 13,000 convicted murderers that have been released into the United States under Biden-Harris under Catch and Release. 16,000 sex offenders, 600,000 overall with criminal records. And you can see that borne out in the crime rates in America, because despite the fact check at the debate, the FBI figures were revised after the debate. And oh, look, actually, crime is way up, not down after all. And there's a reason for that. The number of rapes and murders by illegal immigrants on American women and children. The economy, inflation is out of control in America. Gas prices, grocery prices, housing prices in some places, rents have gone up by, they've more than doubled. They've tripled in some places. So economically, from an immigration perspective, crime, drug-related deaths have gone up under Biden-Harris, again, because of what's coming across the border and the cartels, and abortion. As we know, there have been huge facilitations into pro-life states with pills by post, shield laws, abortion funds. Abortion in many places in those pro-life states is actually cheaper and more accessible now than it was before. So how anyone can look at those two terms and honestly say that Harris would be better. She's also for providing transgender, really quite radical transgender treatment to children and to illegal immigrants who've been convicted of a crime and are sitting in jail. She has gone on record. She is on video in an interview saying that she believes the American taxpayer should fund sex change operations for illegal immigrants who have committed a crime and are in federal prison. I don't know. I've probably gone over my time already on the first question, but I don't know how else to. I don't know how else to frame that. I don't know how else to say it. It seems crazy to me. So what was your second question? They're as bad as each other. I've probably covered off some of that,
well,
haven't I?
It's the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, a lot of people get very, very focused on Trump's character and his flaws. And yes, he is a flawed individual. Absolutely. But he has also faced a huge number of unjust charges, both literal and figurative. So he has his flaws. No one is denying that. And he did not handle the last election well, regardless of what you think happened. He did not handle that well. But the whole January 6th thing, a lot of people can't get past that. A lot of people are still under the impression that multiple people were killed as part of that January 6th riot, which isn't true. One person was killed, and it was a Trump supporter, and she was unarmed, and she was shot by a guard when she was trying to force her way through a door, which obviously she shouldn't have been doing. But no police officers were killed. No one else was killed. Trump did say to march and make your voices heard peacefully and patriotically. And when he went on Twitter a couple of hours later to try and calm the protesters down and call them away from the Capitol. That video was taken down and he was permanently deplatformed from Twitter immediately thereafter. So did he incite that? Possibly. But did he incite it to the level that it was acted out? I don't know. Regardless, did he handle it well? No, he didn't, and no one would say that he handled that transition perfectly. A lot of the court cases, people, I think, especially Christians, really struggle with the fact that he's a convicted felon. He has these 34 counts against him. But again, the gymnastics that the New York courts had to go through to turn misdemeanors into felonies, because they were not felonies before, they were misdemeanors. They had to completely disregard the statute of limitations. I mean, those 34 felony counts relate to the misappropriation of campaign finance money for an NDA for a supposed, I think it was Stormy Daniels, was she a stripper? And she was claiming an affair back in 2006. Now, Trump didn't pay that money. It was done via his lawyer did it, and his signature's not on it. His lawyer did it. It was something that he claims he didn't even know was going on. It was handled through his lawyer. And this was about misappropriation of campaign finances. And again, what most people don't know is that Hillary Clinton was found guilty of exactly the same thing in 2015 for a lot more money and given a slap on the wrist and a £300,000 fine. A $300,000 fine, and yet Trump has been convicted of 34 felonies. And I mean, they had to link the way they had to sort of link different crimes together and intents to get that to a felony, and the jury didn't have to convict unanimously, and they didn't have to convict unanimously on any particular reason. They could pick their own. It was just insane. So people focus a lot on his character, and yes, he's flawed. But if you actually look at what's really happened and what he's really said, I mean, Obama has been repeating throughout the campaign trail this whole Trump claimed that there were very fine people on both sides of a demonstration about the taking down of a statue in the wake of George Floyd's death, and I think it was a statue of Robert E. Lee. Trump claimed that neo-Nazis were very fine people, which is just insane, because if you watch the full video clip, I mean, even Snopes, which is a left-wing fact check, has deemed this false now, and yet the former president of the United States will still go on stage and say that Trump claimed that white supremacists and neo-Nazis were very fine people. What Trump actually said was, because there were many other people protesting around this statue on both sides, many of them law-abiding citizens, there was a bus full of grannies, I think, that were bussed in from somewhere, and what they were protesting against was not necessarily the taking down of the statue, but the forcible taking down of the statue by rioters rather than by, say, a vote, and doing it properly. They were saying that, we're not here because we support slavery or segregation or the Civil War. We're here to say these are our national monuments, and they help us to remember what's happened in the past. And if we are going to take them down, that should be by a democratic vote of the people. So Trump said there's very fine people on both sides. And his next sentence but one was, not the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists. They should be condemned totally. But what the media did was cut that sentence out, zoom in on the picture so that you didn't see all the peaceful protesters round about. You just saw Antifa on one side, white supremacists on the other. Cut Trump to say, Trump says there's very fine people on both sides. He means the white supremacists. He's a white supremacist. And that has just stuck. However, as you say, Kamala Harris can lie with impunity. She has accused Trump of consistently wanting to pass a national abortion ban, which he hasn't. The adverts that she's put on TV claiming that women are going to be in danger from miscarriage and ectopic pregnancy. The lies that she's been telling about her tax policies and how she's going to achieve that and what that would do. It's mind-boggling to me. I can't get past it, how we can say they're as bad as each other. How on earth can you say that someone who is going to, from a tax perspective, she wants to tax unrealized gains. She actually wanted to tax the American people on investments that they had made that hadn't realized any money yet if the stock went up. How do you think that's not going to backfire? She keeps saying she wants billionaires to pay their fair share. Her tax policy is that those that earn the most have to pay their fair share. She needs the corporations and the billionaires to pay their fair share. Well, the top 1% of earners in America pay nearly the top third in taxes. Now, does that mean that there doesn't need to be tax reform? No. But again, the language is so disingenuous. So yeah, I know I don't think they're as bad as each other. I think one is definitely worse.
it does show, doesn't it, the power still of the mainstream media to shape the thinking of certainly people on this side. And one encouragement from the result actually in America
Yeah,
is I think the mainstream media is maybe losing its hold a bit because clearly the majority of people didn't buy the propaganda.
yeah,
So that's encouraging on the one hand, but still here in the UK, I think we're very much slave to the mainstream media, the sort of double lens through which the picture is distorted, the American media and then our own media. Um, on the facts, like Trump said, neo Nazis are fine people. So on the facts, but also I think the subtler um, messaging of not just the media but Hollywood and just whatever it is in the air that we breathe. Um, the some writer referred to it as the fine dust of feminism, for example. There are all these ideologies that we just, as Christians, we absorb them without even realizing the
yeah,
idea that, well, wouldn't it be great to have a person of color who's female as the first president? That'd be great. Well,
yeah,
it might be, but it also really could not be. And in this case, it really wouldn't be.
yeah,
So I think there is this kind of shallow thinking, misinformation for sure from the media, but also really shallow thinking as to, you know, and a sort of superficiality. Not just Trump's personality, not just his language and the rhetoric on Twitter, which admittedly is often
yeah,
pretty
yeah,
off,
absolutely, yeah,
but just simply the optics. I'm
yeah,
afraid a lot of Christians, even in this country, they just don't like the idea of an old white male being in charge as much as they like the idea of a younger black female, and that's
yeah.
about as far as it goes, frankly, for a lot of people. Because when you look at the facts, even just a bit of digging, you can see that character-wise, policy-wise, as you say, you can't even argue they're close.
I think I know we need to move on and time's marching on, but I think just on that as well, one more thing I would say is it's not it should obviously it should have absolutely nothing to do with the fact that she's a woman and she's a person of color, and in fact I think that that's borne out in the exit polls. Trump has won more of the more of the black vote, the Hispanic vote. All of this has gone in his favor, and even as we've said, the female vote is still quite strongly with Trump, although she did win that overall. But I think it's interesting as well. One of the things, other than abortion, that Kamala Harris was running on was the fight for democracy, the preservation of democracy. The gaslighting here is so strong because the opposite, it couldn't be further from the truth. The opposite is true. And this is heavily borne out with regards to illegal immigration, but getting those immigrants, particularly into swing states, and then enabling those immigrants to vote. The population of the 7 swing states, so there's already an illegal immigrant population, but somebody produced a chart with the illegal immigrant population in the swing states has gone up with the exception of Arizona. The other 6 have gone up anywhere between, not Arizona, Georgia. The other 6 have gone up between 300 and 750% in the last year in the run up to this election. The Biden-Harris administration actually sued the Commonwealth of Virginia because the governor of Virginia, it's a blue state with a Republican governor, Glenn Youngkin, they had found 1,600 voters in Virginia who were illegal immigrants. You can still get a driver's license, so you get paperwork under catch and release. You can still go and get a driver's license at the DMV. And when you do that, the DMV will automatically give you voter registration information, even though you're not a citizen. And that's true across getting benefits. Any of these official bodies where you go as an illegal immigrant, if you're on catch and release with a notice to appear for a hearing in 7 years, you can sign up for benefits, you can get a driver's license. All of these places will give you voter registration forms. Now, on the voter registration form, you don't need to prove that you're a citizen to register to vote. And that's true in all but 3 states. In all but 3 states, you do not need to prove that you're a citizen to register to vote. And in Virginia, they had found that 1,600 people who had gone to get driver's licenses and registered to vote through the DMV had actually self-identified on the form that they were not citizens. So you have to check a box to say whether you're a citizen or not, but it's relying on honesty. And 1,600 people had been honest and said, I'm registering to vote, but I'm not a citizen. So the Commonwealth of Virginia removed those people from the voter rolls after having given them 14 days to prove citizenship. They wrote to them, said, you got 14 days. If not, we're going to take you off the voter rolls because if you're not a citizen, it's not legal for you to vote. The Biden-Harris administration sued the Commonwealth of Virginia to put those illegal voters back on the voter rolls in advance of the election. That actually made it to the Supreme Court the day before the election. It went through the courts in Virginia. The Democratic courts in Virginia agreed with the Biden-Harris administration to put them back on, even though it violated the law. And that made it to the Supreme Court the day before the election, and they overturned it and said, no, they're non-citizens, they can't vote. But that shows you the approach. Why? What other possible reason could you have for wanting non-citizens to be put back on a voter roll other than because you want them to vote? And those votes would be illegal, but because of the benefits that are being given to illegal immigrants, they are going to be very heavily democratic. Why else are you flying illegal immigrants across the border into swing states? The population, and I know Springfield, Ohio came up because of one of Trump's comments about eating dogs and cats, one of the things he is flawed for and shouldn't do. But the population of Springfield, Ohio is 60,000 people, and they put 20,000 additional Haitian migrants into Springfield, Ohio. And this is not about being against immigration, but if you take a town with a population of 60,000 and you add another 20,000 people in there and potentially give them voter registration forms, what are you doing to the services in that town? A lot of these people don't speak English. Again, no crime in that, but you're talking about 20,000 in one go. So this whole preservation of democracy that Kamala Harris was running on, you're saying you want to preserve democracy by actively facilitating illegal voting so that you can turn the swing states, almost permanently democratic. If that had succeeded in the way that I think it certainly looked like they were planning for it to succeed, and if Kamala Harris had won and the illegal immigration across the border into swing states would have continued to be facilitated, and she had proposed, the bill that she proposed, the border bill she proposed, within the last year, actually, that Biden-Harris, coming up to an election year, we have to look like we care about the border. So the border bill that they proposed, which Trump urged Republicans to veto, and they did, there was very, very little about controlling the border. It was still going to allow 2 million illegal immigrants in a year, but it proposed mass amnesty for everyone already in the country, the fast track to citizenship. But the point of that was to make those people into democratic voters. You're shipping these people into swing states to turn the swing states permanently Democrat so that you can subvert democracy and ensure a democratic majority through however many years for decades. So the gaslighting, and that's just one example of how they're saying they're for one thing, when in actual fact, when you look at their actions, she's for the complete opposite. And I will say this of Trump, I defy anyone to say he doesn't say what he means. He says something, whether it's distasteful or not, he's saying what he intends to do, and he's being quite honest about it. It's quite hard to find deceit in Donald Trump's policies.
This has been really enlightening, Debbie. Thank you.
Sorry, I've gone on a bit. You know how I feel about this.
It's good. I think it is enlightening because I'm learning so much here, and forget the BBC. People need Debbie BC. That could be your name. We did talk about you having a side hustle, US politics, newscast.
Yeah, Ruth was saying the same thing this morning.
There's a gap there. There's a gap. Now I've got literally 2 minutes left, and I need to say 3 things. So I'm going to do that, and then any final word from you. We talked a bit about errors in the States. I think here in the UK, there's only really one error that I'm seeing really in prominent responses by Christians. Predominantly, people are of that mind, well, of course, Harris would have been better. That's really what we're seeing, I think, largely amongst Christians. And it's so obvious. People think it's so obvious that Trump is bad and Harris is better. To be a Trump supporter is basically a slur in this country. People almost think it's just, there isn't even a case for it. Of course, Trump is bad, and of course this is bad news. Just one example on Twitter, Tim Farron, with a sort of face screaming in fear emoji next to an American flag. It's just as if it's just obvious Harris would have been better. Well, hang on, how can that be so? So I think that's the error over here, but I think the error is compounded in that those who think that way, and that's sadly many Christians in this country just think that's obvious, they go on to stereotype and parody anyone who supports Trump sort of to any degree, even with the nuances, the caveats, and so on, as if they are those type three errors of you think Trump's the Messiah, you overlook all his faults, you know you're putting your trust in princes, and that's the error I think we have here, is that kind of straw manning of anyone who supports Trump in any way, as if you must be a racist, must be a bigot, and so on, um, and uh, and all the while overlooking the depravity, the wickedness really of Harris. So I think that's the error we have here, and I think that's what we need to watch out for. Again, it's fed to us by the media. We're taught to believe, Trump is bad, Trump supporters are bad. Anyone who cares about anything should vote for Harris, and we've fallen for that hook, line, and sinker really in the UK.
Yeah.
Now, certainly, as time goes on, as the pro-life movement gathers steam, we may have to be on the lookout for those who are putting their trust in princes.
Mm-hmm.
Putting too much trust in political solutions, and all that kind of stuff. That may become an error that we need to watch out for one day in our country. We're nowhere near there yet. I mean, you hardly have to do anything publicly pro-life before some Christian says, "Well, I wouldn't want to be a Trump supporting, redneck bigot like you."
Yeah.
So that to me is the error here that we need to watch out for. Second point I just wanted to make real quick is, helpfully, Callum Miller on Twitter kind of issued a bit of a warning to pro-lifers in the States, and I think we've covered a lot of this, but just saying that here's the work that needs to be done. Um, Learn the lessons from Europe. When a Conservative Party starts leaning a little bit to the left to get a bit more of
Yes.
the vote, look at where it can end up.
Yeah.
So a worthy warning from Callum Miller, and that certainly for our friends in the States, that's one encouragement we would put to you as we pray for you is, and you know this already, I think many of them are aware of this, but yeah, learn the lessons from Europe.
Mm.
But finally, just bringing it home for us, lessons I think we draw out of this again: don't trust the media. Do your research.
Yeah.
You've got to dig just for the facts, let alone the sort of interpretations and the evaluations made as a result. So yeah, don't trust the media, and once you've found the facts, think it through biblically, weigh it, talk about it with other Christians, pray. Don't just accept what we're told to accept by the media, because the reality is, if as Christians we can casually or emphatically say or imply that, well, of course Harris would have been better, or of course they're equal evils, we are so far from being helpful in leading the nation in righteousness and justice. We're so far from being helpful for the unborn babies who cannot
Yeah.
speak for themselves. And for all our pro-lifeness, whatever we say we believe, whatever, if we end up playing for the wrong side, what good is it? If,
Yeah.
if we if we would be those who would, given a chance, elect someone who supports uh, an organization caught red-handed, torturing babies to death and selling their body parts for money, if we would support that, I don't care how pro-life we claim to be, we are playing for the other side.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. And that's how serious it is.
Yeah.
So there's a warning. We've got to get our heads straight here in the UK. We've got to think right through these things if we're in any way serious about ending this injustice.
Yeah.
Any final words from you, Debbie? Otherwise, we need to sign off.
No, no, I completely agree with that. And I just, I think as well, I suppose the one thing I just would say is, I mean, Franklin Graham, the night before the election, was praying for God's will to be done, and he is definitely a Donald Trump supporter. But that was his final prayer: was "Thy will be done, Lord," and that was the prayer I think of so many Christians across the world. And I do. I thank God for this, not making, not wanting to in any way make that idol figure out of Donald Trump, but if he can be an instrument, God is in charge. This is all of God. He is sovereign, and we have this victory across all the branches of government in the United States, and I'm hopeful and prayerful that good will come from that. But I am confident that the Lord's will has been done in this, and that gives me great confidence.
That's a great note to finish on. Thank you, Debbie. Yeah, thy kingdom come, thy
Yes,
will be done.
absolutely.
Amen.
Yes,
Well, thanks everyone for
amen.
listening, and look forward to joining you again next
Thanks,
week.
thanks for having me. Bye.